Welcome back to Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. I'm the Ryan half.
And I'm the Brian half.
And this
together we make a whole bistro.
A whole
Bible bistro.
A whole Bible Bistro.
You're the old covenant and I'm the new covenant. So.
I think you're the old one.
No. You're about 2/3 and I'm a third. That's the way we should start.
Of what? Of what? Of the
covenant? I was thinking
this a size thing? This is not starting well. Well, I can't help it that I'm a bigger
You're
person.
a big man. You're just a big man.
You know what I reference when I think of my size in general? Do you ever see the movie Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito?
Yes. Well, actually, I haven't ever seen the movie, but I know.
What?
This is one of those movies that you think I should have seen that I've never seen. I understand the concept. I've seen enough of the trailer. I think the trailer told me everything I need to know.
No, it's a fantastic movie. You have to see it. But in the beginning, Danny DeVito is getting a parking ticket because he parked in a handicapped parking spot.
Right.
And he comes out and they're like, we don't have a parking sticker. And he goes, do I look normal to you? And so I've thought, maybe on the other hand, maybe that's me. So anyway, yes, that's what's happening. Thank you for making a large joke. Really appreciate it. We're off to a good start. Anyway, well, we're back to the Bistro. This is our third episode in season four of the Bible Bistro. So we had a little bit of like cultural age stuff a couple episodes ago, and then we started the barn burning series
in Leviticus.
Are we trying to burning series of Leviticus?
Are we trying to turn away listeners?
I think so. This is for the hardcore folk. This is like I'm doing this.
Stick with us. It was. I mean, last time was fun. It was enjoyable to talk about sacrifice, and we're going to do that some more today. So.
Yeah. So we're continuing. Leviticus 1-7 is a little. Yeah. It's kind of sets up some of the sacrificial stuff. So what are we looking at today, then, Brian?
Well, so last week I kind of walked through the steps of sacrifice. You might remember, and we talked about kind of the way that it was done, and there's some misconceptions or misunderstandings people have about this. And I mentioned there's going to be these repetitions. So we're going to talk really today about the other sacrifices or the other offerings that are called for and the reason for them and what they symbolize and so forth. And I think things that we can learn from this. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to kind of show us that I think the book of Leviticus, as I mentioned last week, can teach us things about who God is and what he's concerned about. And so that's kind of what we're going to go on and talk about. I don't know.
Something just happened. It's a poltergeist.
I was going to say something fell and it almost unplugged my lamp. So,
anyway, watch that on YouTube, everyone. Yeah. So I was reading a little bit this week about Leviticus and correct me if I'm wrong. Like this is kind of I think we talked about this a little bit, the pinnacle in some ways, maybe of the Pentateuch. Like this is the longest book.
Shortest, the shortest book. It's right in the center. It's the shortest book, and it's right in the center though of the rest of them. So it kind of fits in this. Yeah, it has important place, I think. Yeah.
I just gave myself a thumbs down on the screen again. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it.
I don't know what's happening. Well, anyway, So all right. So, but that Leviticus is kind of the Pentateuch. Maybe again, correct me if I'm wrong or what this author said was wrong. It's kind of pushing us towards to look at this as kind of this is the important stuff about becoming God's holy people.
I think so. I think it has to do with what's going to, as I mentioned last week, it's kind of you're coming out of a religious system of a polytheistic people. You're going to another polytheistic people, and I want you to understand that you are not to continue in their practices, and you're not to participate in worship in the same way that they do. A set apart holiness. We talk about often the word set apart might be a way to think about it. So you're going to be this set apart people. They're going to be different. You're going to be distinct from these nations around you. I think is what's going on. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
All right. Well, let's talk more about some sacrifices or offerings of sorts.
So do you remember what offering we talked about last week? Do you remember what we kind of broke down in Leviticus chapter 1?
It was atonement, burn
offering. The burn offering. And it was one that the entire animal was consumed. One thing I mentioned just briefly, and I'll say this again because this next sacrifice we're going to talk about, it kind of brings it up. This is the burnt offering is the one sacrifice that has to have an animal involved. there has to be the shedding of blood in this particular sacrifice. The others, we're going to see that there are some other ways that you can sacrifice, and we'll talk about the reasons for that. But it is one that the entire animal is consumed. It's the only one that is in which that takes place. I mentioned last week there are prescribed times of the year that the priest were supposed to sacrifice, and even the day. Certain times the priests were supposed to offer these sacrifices to God in a regular kind of schedule. So that was the burnt offering. Now, the reason it really lays out those steps of what the worshiper is supposed to do and what the priest is supposed to do and all those kind of things. Now we're going to get into this, the different other kinds of offerings that there are. And basically there are 4 others that we're going to talk about here. The second one is the grain offering. And this is basically the whole chapter. Leviticus chapter 2 talks about the grain offering. Or sometimes it's called the meal offering. I don't like that. It's the old use of the word meal. Like if you think about going to the place where they grind your wheat into meal, So, but we use the word meal. Well, never mind.
Differently.
Grain offering.
Language is different. Gotcha. Okay.
Grain offering.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you think. Now, the interesting thing is basically you're supposed to mix this wheat with this flour with oil, with other flavorings and different things. And this is actually something that's to be provided for the high priest. In the case of Leviticus, it's always talking about Aaron and his sons, right? Because remember, this is taking place during that period of time after the end of the book of Exodus and before we get into the book of Numbers. So Aaron is the high priest and his sons are the priest. And so this grain offering was bread. And you could either bring it as kind of it almost sounds like dough, right? Except one of the big things is no yeast.
Right.
It's to be unleavened. There's not to be any yeast. And so it's not going to be rise. It's not going to rise. It's going to be like a flatbread. And that, of course, in the New Testament, we get, and even in the Old Testament, we get this idea of yeast as kind of being the image of sin, right? Or uncleanness.
Right.
And so this is supposed to be bread that is unleavened. And so you're to bring it. There's different ways you can cook it. I always imagine it's kind of funny because they talk about, you can bake it, you can put it on a griddle. So I'm like imagining a pancake, something like that, But the priests are to eat this. This is part of what provides for them. Now there's a portion of it that's supposed to be burned on the altar, but the majority of this is actually to help support the priest and their families in their duties, basically. One other thing that's just mentioned here briefly, and I only mention it because it's used in the New Testament. We may talk about this later in the book of Leviticus as well. It can be used as a first fruits offering. Have you heard that term, first fruits?
Yes.
And that's the idea when you go out to start harvesting your grain, harvesting your field. The very first portion of it is a first fruits offering. So that's to be brought to the Lord first. So that's an example. That's a very specific time and a very specific type of a grain offering that you offer. It's the first fruits. And of course, I mean, what do you think? What do you think would be the significance of that? What's the significance of first fruits?
I think it's that God has provided this, and we're returning. Yeah. We realize this is from God, and we offer it back to Him.
And he gets the very first part of it, right? He gets the very first part of it. So before we, eat it ourselves, before we profit off of it, we give him back a portion of it. And exactly, you're exactly right. We're recognizing. I often pray this. We're in one of those churches that when we take up the offering, then I offer an offertory prayer. Kind of old school, I know, but I'm often thinking about. And I'm saying to God on behalf of the entire congregation, we recognize that everything that we have comes from you, but we're giving you back this to recognize, in recognition of that, to symbolize this. So that's kind of part of what we can learn from the grain offering. The second one we're going to talk about today, or the third one overall. So we think about burnt offering, grain offering, and then we get to the peace offering, or this is sometimes called the fellowship offering. Peace offering or fellowship offering. And what's unique about this one is that certain parts of the animal are offered to God And in fact, we'll look at this in just a minute because it's interesting, the parts of the animal that God requires to be given to him. Certain parts of the animal are sacrificed to God. The rest of it is then prepared. The rest of the meat of this offering is prepared to be eaten. And it's eaten in kind of a ceremonial meal. It's to be eaten right there together. And so if you read through Leviticus chapter 3, that's where it talks about this. And I'm going to bring in a little bit of Leviticus 7. And I'll say what Leviticus 7 is in a bit. But this offering, this fellowship offering, is a meal offering. Now, this is not, and it's a meal that's to be shared, right? This is not mandatory. Whereas the burnt offering was a mandatory offering, some of the other offerings we're going to talk about a little bit later are ones that you can choose to or need to be done at certain times. This is one that is not mandatory. And there are basically three reasons that people would sometimes do this. Sometimes they would do it as a sign of thanksgiving to God. And if you read through Leviticus chapter 7, then this is chapter 7, verses 12 through 18. It talks a little bit more about some of the reasons you might do the peace offering. And so imagine a situation where maybe you've been asking God for something and it happens, or there's a good thing, maybe a birth in your family, or I don't know, whatever major good event that you can imagine. We double the number of listeners in the Bible Bistro or whatever.
2.
So we'd have to add to our family in order to increase the number.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Anyway, what the worshiper might choose to have a Thanksgiving offering, basically to say to God, I thank you for this blessing that has taken place in the life of me and my family. Often the meal would include the family. And so then there's a certain portion that the priest might get as well. So this is one reason a peace offering or fellowship offering could be offered without a sign of thanksgiving. It can also be used to emphasize fellowship with others. In other words, it might be in order to strengthen bonds, let's say, between two people or two families, something like that. You might offer a fellowship offering or peace offering in order to bring people closer together. And then the third reason, it could be the result of a vow. And there's a few stories in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I'm thinking about this vow that Paul takes in the New Testament, for example. And there are times when you got to the end of that vow. In other words, when whatever you had vowed comes about, there are times that you might go then to the temple and offer a tabernacle, obviously during this period, but then later the temple, and offer a fellowship offering. Basically, it's kind of a mark, if you will, marks a time when the end of that vow takes place. So that's the peace offering. Any questions on the grain or the peace offering or fellowship offering so far?
There's some difference about so the burnt offering, everything's consumed.
Yep, absolutely.
In the fire. But we have with this one, only the fat is.
Oh yeah, I was going to read that. Why don't you read that? Chapter 3, verses 9 through 11. This is the part that God requires in the fellowship offering.
Yeah. For the fellowship offering, you were to bring a food offering to the Lord. Its fat, the entire fat tail cut off close to the backbone, the internal organs, and all the fat that is connected to them, both kidneys with the fat on them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver, which you will remove with the kidneys. The priest shall burn them on the altar as a food offering presented to the Lord. If your offering is a goat, you're to present it before the Lord, lay your hand on its head, and slaughter it in front of the tent of meeting.
Yeah,
Aaron's.
I think just through 11. Did I say through 11? Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, but that's plenty. But you get what I'm saying. It's just that portion, and so all the I guess we would call it the roast and the steak part of it. If it's a calf, right?
Yeah,
is to be prepared as a meal, and it's actually this goes more into it in chapter 7. So I'll go ahead and say this now. I said I was going to say it later, but Leviticus chapter 7 is kind of a hodgepodge of different other regulations about all of these. So, it's kind of like, oh, by the way, this part of it needs to be done as well. And so you have a little bit of an instruction there about when. So it depends on what kind. It's really chapter 7, verses 12 through 18, where you find these different, like the Thanksgiving offering and that kind of thing. And the different reasons you might bring the fellowship offering determine how long it is until that meat needs to be eaten.
Yes.
In some cases, it has to be the same day.
Right.
In others, it can be 2 days. And I think there's the longest it can be is on the third day. It can be eaten, if I remember correctly. I'll let somebody correct me on that. But that's the fellowship offering there. So.
Right. And so, and in this one, the worshiper participates, has some of the meal, and also the priest gets something to eat as well. Okay.
And the interesting thing here, and I'll say more about this a little bit later, because I think there's another one that points to this. I think the interesting thing for us about this is it emphasizes that relationships matter to God as well, right? And I'm talking about not just our relationship with Him, but also our relationship with one another.
Right.
And so, I think about this. It's not exactly the same, but it'd be a little bit like our fellowship meals that we have often at church, or the love feast that they talk about in the early years of Christianity, when people would gather in their homes and they would share meals together in order to show their connection, right? Mm-hmm. I've talked before about this, that Christianity really was kind of reordering of family, right? Especially in the early years. Calling someone brother and sister now is almost like kind of it's kind of a passe thing. We don't necessarily do anymore. And even when we do it, it's kind of like, oh, brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. Mm-hmm. But when they said it, they were saying we're remaking the family. And it goes back even to where Jesus, you might remember, he was teaching it was a crowd, and his mother and brothers couldn't get to him. And they said, hey, Jesus, your mom's here. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And he says, these are my mother and these are my brothers, right? In other words, this is our family. And so thinking of ourselves in that very close relationship. So it's a long way around to say, basically, I think this shows us, again, when we look at Leviticus, one of the questions I think is important to ask is to say, what does this tell us about about who God is and what He's concerned about? And I think we can see here that He has a desire to see His people relate properly to one another as well. And we'll see that in other ways later as we get through some of the other parts of the book of Leviticus.
Okay.
I forgot something I meant to say at the beginning. I should have written this down. This is just a Bible study principle as well, I think. So I mentioned there's lots of repetition here. And what's interesting then in the book of Leviticus, like when you have these sections where there's all this repetition, just a tip is to notice the differences. So what one of the things we're talking about now is what's the difference between the burnt offering. And by the way, you said that's the only one that the whole animal is to be consumed. Okay. Mm-hmm. By the fire, I'm saying, it's the whole animal is to be burnt. And so when you look at the differences, when you have some of these very similar passages, when you look at the differences, then ask yourself the question, what do these indicate, or what do they show us, or what do they teach us? And that's kind of basic. That's basically what I'm doing today is we're looking at those distinctions.
Yeah.
Or those
the fellowship offering has a meal that you can share.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a part of the fellowship.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions on that or comments? No. Okay. No. Then these last two offerings both have to do with the idea of broken relationship with God. And one is the sin offering. That's the next one we're going to talk about. Basically, from the beginning of chapter 4 down through the middle of chapter 5 deals with the issue of the sin offering, and it'll mention oftentimes unintentional sin. Actually, go ahead and read Leviticus chapter 4 verses 1 through 3, and I'll make two different points here. You should read that first part of this.
Say to the Israelites, when anyone sins unintentionally and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, if the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, he must bring to the Lord a young bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin he has committed.
So this is talking about something that you've done against God, some kind of regulation or law that you've broken against God, and you have to bring this animal. Now, it's a little bit funny there when you get to the beginning of this. So who's he talk about first? He talks about the priest, and the second point I want to make with this is it depends upon your status in the community what you are required to bring. And again, this is a required. Both of these last two are going to be required sacrifices in particular situations. So essentially, the higher the status and the more wealth, presumably, that this person has available to them, the larger sacrifice is going to be required. We talked about that a little bit last week with the burnt offering. Same with the sin offering and trespass offering. But we are going to see a little bit of a difference here that I think is very interesting. Look at the second one we find mentioned. Actually, it's not the second one. So it mentions the priest, mentions the leader of the people. But look at Leviticus chapter 4, verses 13 through 15. Read that for me and tell me who that is talking about.
If the whole Israelite community sins unintentionally and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, even though the community is unaware of the matter, when they realize their guilt and the sin they committed becomes known, the assembly must bring a young bull as a sin offering and present it before the tent of meeting.
And then it goes on, it says the elders of the people lay their hands on the bull. So the representatives, kind of the leaders of the people, you might think they're the ones who stand in, if you will, on behalf of the whole community. So here we're talking about a community sin, which is an interesting idea that they've done something wrong. Somehow they have failed. Can you think of any stories in the Old Testament that would point to something like that happening? Can you think of?
Oh, well, I mean, like when all the people sinned.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, this is prior to Leviticus, but you have the bull, the Apis bull.
Sure. Yeah. You're talking about it when he was when Moses was on Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you have instances like that. You have instances where I don't know. Would you consider it like a people when they split, when the kingdom splits? I don't know.
Could be the ones I was thinking about. A couple of them. One of them is really interesting. Is the couple of times people lose the Bible. I don't know if you remember these.
Yes. Yeah.
And like there's one where they're remodeling the temple. I'm trying to remember who's the king now. I think
Josiah.
It's either Josiah or Jehu. I can't remember which one it is. You may be right, but they're remodeling the temple, and because it's fallen into disrepair because basically it's been used as a pagan worship place, and they find a copy of the law. Now, what they probably find, we don't know if it's the entire 5 books of Moses, but it's probably at least the book of Leviticus is what we're talking about there when it says he finds the law, and he reads it and he realizes, oh my goodness, we've fallen short in this. And the immediate thing he does, of course he tears his clothes and he's in repentance, but they offer the sacrifices, right? They go back to this idea. And so it's that kind of a story, I think. Or later on, when the prophets come to the people and they say to them, you have all turned your backs on God. You've done these things. I think this is the kind of situation that he's imagining when the community, or I'm going to say it this way, it may be a bit too strong to say this, but when the society as a whole has turned aside, then these are the requirements. So the leaders are the ones who stand in for the people and ask for this.
Like the book of Judges. I mean, isn't that kind of a whole
over and over again?
Yeah.
Right? So this kind of idea of turning away or forgetting God, failing to return to Him, that kind of thing. So members are mentioned as well, and just when I say this, I mean members of the community. So again, your status depends upon the kind of sacrifice that's offered. So I want you to read 2 verses here. And when we think about this, Ryan, it's chapter 5. One of them is verse 7, and the other is verse 11.
Okay. 7. Anyone who can't afford a lamb is to bring 2 doves or 2 pigeons to the Lord as a penalty for their sin, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. If, however, they cannot afford 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, they are to bring an offering for their sin, a tenth of an ephah of the finest flour for a sin offering. They must not put olive oil or incense on it because it is a sin offering.
It's a sin offering. It's not a grain offering. That's the distinction there, interestingly enough. But here's what I think is really fascinating about this. And I think, again, it shows us something about God. Because this is a mandatory offering, and he's saying, if you've turned aside from me, you've got to do this. It depends on what you can afford, right? If you can afford a goat, if you're a member of the community, you're supposed to offer that, sheep or goat. You can't afford that, then two small birds, either a dove or pigeon. Again, we've talked before about this is what is sacrificed when Jesus,
when
is
Mary and
taken to the
Joseph take
temple.
Jesus, yeah.
Right. And so two birds. One, it says it's a burnt offering. In other words, it is completely consumed, while the other one would be portions of it would be consumed. But then even it says, if you can't even afford birds, right, two pigeons or two doves, then a tenth of an ephah of flour. And basically that would be enough for your daily bread. That's the way I'm going to say it. Like that'd be enough for a loaf of bread for you for a day. And I always say that's about as poor as you can get, because if you don't have enough to eat every day, you're not going to be with us very long, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna die. And so even the very poorest in the land, the idea is because this is a mandatory sacrifice, God makes provision for even the very poorest people in the land to do this. And I find that what does that make you? What does that tell you about God, or what does that make you think about in connection
Anyone
with
can come
God?
to him. I mean, like it's,
Right.
um, it's not backbreaking. Like he wants you to bring but it's not meant to make you destitute. You're
Right.
offering to him. Like he cares about your position.
Right.
Like there's something that is owed him, but he cares about your
Yeah.
position as well in that.
And he provides a way for you
Yeah.
to come. I think that's it. So here's something I think we need to talk about with this, because it's going to help again set us up for what these sacrifices I think teach us as Christians, and why I think it's still important for us to read the book of Leviticus. That's the other thing we're trying to
Mhm.
think about. I've got two verses here, one from chapter 4, verses 20 through 21, and the other's chapter 5, verse 13. They're very similar, but I would say here's the result. And it's one of these repetitions. You're going to see it over and over again throughout this passage. But read those two for me, if you would,
Yeah,
Ryan.
this is 4:20 through 21. And do with this bull just as he did with the bull of this for the sin offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for the community, and they will be forgiven. Then he shall take the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. This is the sin offering for the community.
Okay, so go ahead and read chapter 5, verse 13 too.
Yeah, 5:13. Here we go. In this way, the priest will make atonement for them for any of these sins they have committed, and they will be forgiven. The rest of the offering will be given to the priest, as in the case of the grain offering.
Okay, so what? And here again, it's, not the entire animal. It's a certain portion goes to the priest and his family in order to support the work of the temple, basically. So there's two really important words here, I think. The first is, it says, and this will make atonement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we've talked about atonement before. We got a whole episode on atonement we've talked about before. That word is used in the New Testament, and here's the birth of that concept, if you will, in the Old Testament. This idea that it is going to renew relationship between God and His people is the idea, and the second is this. And I know the book of Hebrews, we'll get to that eventually, right? The second is this. It says, what does it say about the people then? It says they will be
forgiven.
They'll be forgiven. Mm-hmm. So this is the sin offering. The reason for it was to provide a way for the forgiveness of sins. Now, I understand it does not effectively, right, deal with sin forever. And the Hebrew writer says it pushed back sin year after year, right? It didn't effectively deal with sin. And I think there's even a reason for that, because we've talked before about sin separates us from God, right? And so God is the source of life. When we are, He's the one who made everything, right? So He's the source of all things. When we are separated from the source of life, then the result of that is death. That's what we have caused by turning our back on God, like the sin, right? Mm-hmm. And so atonement is the only way for that relationship to be renewed, right? The relationship that we broke by our sin. The only way for it to be renewed is for someone, in this case, something, right? An animal, to stand in as a substitute for my sin. And the point I want to make here is, that ultimately the death of an animal is not equivalent to the death of a human being, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's an important concept. I know that there are some animal lovers who might be listening to this that might disagree with that, but I think that's an important concept. We've talked before about that only humans are created in the image of God, and that puts us in a special position, not a position to abuse or just like any other thing, but it does make us different. We're not simply creatures. We're not simply we are creation, but we are created in the image of God. And therefore, it is only another human being who can ultimately stand in our place. We'll say more about that a little bit later. But that idea of atonement is in this sacrificial system.
Mhm.
And it's that language that's used in the New Testament, as we're going to see, in order to talk about what it is that Jesus has done on our behalf. So, there's something going on here that is teaching us. Paul calls it the person who led us. The law led us to basically learn about what it means. What were we going to say?
Well, I think oftentimes when we think about this, or I've had conversations with people, it's just like, I couldn't keep track of this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like how the blood works, or that like it was, uh, or how maybe the Israelites thought of it at this point. But like I think this is in some way like this is atonement, and this is
Yes.
forgiveness. Like this is while it might feel very gruesome, is it liberating to them? Like that
Yeah.
there is a means for them, knowing that they're going to be, that we have the rest of the law, what's going on in there, and we have the Decalogue and the other pieces of the law to follow. But like God has made a way for
Yes.
them to remain in relationship with him in spite of their sin. Like it is,
Exactly.
I oftentimes, I think there's the perspective as we look back from the New Testament, like, oh, these people are just like, they hate the law. You know what I mean? Like it's
Right.
almost like it's just this drudgery system,
Yeah.
but it is the system by which that they can maintain relationship with God. So it's not, I think sometimes we get this idea in our minds as New Testament people as
Sure.
Gentiles living, 2000 years
Right.
separated from some of this, that this was, the system was overly oppressive to them, but
Yeah.
it was a liberating system for them.
That's the thing, and I like what you said, that God made a way, that He provided a way in this system for them to come to Him. And I'll say a couple of things about this toward the end as we get into talking about some of the New Testament implications of this. But I think that's absolutely right. And then here's where I get into trouble sometimes,
Uh-oh.
because
Trouble time.
so there are times where and this has changed my understanding, I will say, over time. There are times when we make it law versus grace,
Mm.
right? Law versus grace, and there are New Testament passages that talk about that. Moses brought the law, grace and peace came through Christ Jesus. I mean, I know those
Mhm.
passages. It's not like I'm ignoring those, right?
What?
But here's what I'm going to say is that the law was a kind of grace.
Mhm.
And what I mean is that God acted. Grace is always God acting on our behalf, right? God
Mhm.
acted in a way, providing this in order for people to be able to continue to draw near to Him. And
Mhm.
that's even seen in the idea of the word itself. The word for sacrifice itself carries with it this idea of bringing near, right? That we're being brought together, and so I think there is a grace in this. Now, is it the same? Is it the same as the grace we have in Jesus Christ? No. I mean, I've read Paul, right?
Mhm.
I've read the book of Galatians. I understand
You
this.
understand it, right?
Um, and I think it's almost like we have to understand that first before we can make sense of things like Paul going, but look at what we have now in Christ, right? Look at this,
Mhm.
the depths of His grace and His mercy that is available to us in Christ Jesus. I think you almost need to understand that this system was what they had in order to draw near to God, and that's what it meant to them. In order for then, when they begin to understand that Christ is the ultimate sacrifice, that that Paul has this incredible revelation, right? That who could have imagined this kind of freedom in Christ now? And so anyway, that's again part of what I think we understand as we read through Leviticus.
Yeah, that it is to reveal sin. Paul talks about, like, I didn't know, like that is part of the law, but it is also a means of grace to the people in that time. To draw near to him.
And I'll just say this: if out of the blue, without the sacrificial system, God would have said, "Here's my son who is offering himself," or Jesus had said, "I've come to offer myself on behalf of sin, sacrifice for sin," we'd all been like, "Oh, what does that mean?" It's this system that teaches us that. Let's talk about the final sacrifice, and then we'll get on to some New Testament stuff. This is chapter 5, verse 14, then down through chapter 6, verse 7 in the book of Leviticus. And this talks about the trespass offering, it's often called. And the way I would kind of summarize this is this has to do with the effect that our sin has upon other people. Our sin often or always has a splash over effect upon our community, upon the people around us, our families, our friends, our neighbors. And I think the trespass offering is pointing to that. It's where we've stepped outside the bounds is the idea of a trespass, right? So, and I don't want to draw this too hard and fast, but the sin offering, I think, is primarily thinking about the way that we have broken relationship with God. I think the trespass offering has to do also with the way that our sin has affected the community around us. So the easiest example I can think of in this is actually the last one. This is Leviticus chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. And this one helps me kind of visualize or imagine what I think is at stake here. So do you want to read that last
6,
sacrifice?
1 through 7. The Lord said to Moses, "If anyone sins and is unfaithful to the Lord by deceiving a neighbor about something entrusted to them or left in their care, or about something stolen, or if they cheat their neighbor, or if they find lost property and lie about it, or if they swear falsely about any such sin that people may commit, when they sin in any of these ways and realize their guilt, they must return what they have stolen or taken by extortion, or what was entrusted to them, or the lost property they found, or whatever it was they swore falsely about. They must make restitution." Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, gosh.
Did you lose it?
They must make restitution in full and add a fifth of the value to it and give it all to the owner on the day they present their guilt offering. And as a penalty, they must bring to the priest, that is, to the Lord, their guilt offering, a ram from the flock, one without defect and of the proper value. And this way, the priest will make atonement for them before the Lord, and they will be forgiven for any of the things they did that made them guilty.
So the trespass offering includes this similar thing to the sin offering where I have to offer sacrifice in order to make myself right with God, right? Because my sin has broken that relationship. But it also includes restitution, right? For the way that I've wronged my neighbor. And there's going to be lots of examples of this as we get through the book of Leviticus. There's lots of ways to wrong your neighbor, right?
Right.
These are kind of summary ways, right? Well, if you've taken something directly from them, or if they gave you something and you never gave it back, or things like if you've sworn falsely about something, in other words, through a court of law, you've taken something that's not yours. There's different ways that you could have harmed them.
Right.
Later on, I'll give you just an example. One of the big ones is if you borrow your neighbor's ox and it falls into a ditch.
Classic example.
Like one does, So
take an ox mudding, and it's
and it talks about it. Basically, if you borrow something from somebody, you need to take care of it. You don't treat it like it's
like
not
you rented
important.
it.
Right. Right. Treat it like it's your own.
Yeah.
So the point with this is so there's a sacrifice still that renews relationship with God, but then there's also a penalty, right? There's a restitution. So you have to return to that person what you have taken from them or withheld from them, or, in other ways, defrauded them of it, and an additional 20%. Right. So like 120% is what you then owe them for this. So again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about God is also concerned, I think, with our relationship with one another. It was about making things right between the sinner and God, but also healing the relationship between you and whoever you have wronged. So I think that's the other thing. So.
Good.
So I just before we get on to some other things, what do you think we've learned, or what do you think we see in these sacrifices?
Well, I mean, I think God is maintaining relationship to each other and maintaining relationship to Him,
Right.
and like that He has made ways for those things to do that. And I think even like with this trespassing one, it's not only are you making restitution to the person you have wronged, you're also making the atonement to God. You know what I mean? Like that,
right.
You're making a sacrifice to God as well. That there is multiple relationships that need to be cared for in the community. That it's not, you are not your own. That you're part of this, and that how you live in this context is important. And that God's, God is, he's made a way no matter where you are. He wants you to be in right relationship with him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good example illustration of this. And so that's what we have. So that's pretty much the sacrificial system. I mentioned this earlier, the word sacrifice. Then it's interesting then when you start looking at that word in the New Testament, words like atonement and words like sacrifice or offering in the New Testament. A couple of examples where Jesus uses it. One is a couple of times in the book of Matthew, and I always say this is really important, where he's always talking to the Pharisees when he says this, but a couple of times he quotes the Old Testament where God says, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." And basically it's where the Pharisees have been more concerned about keeping the law perfectly, in other words, for themselves, which becomes almost kind of a selfishness, right? Instead of thinking about, what I'm suggesting we need to think about, which is what is God showing us that is important to Him. So, for example, one time Jesus heals on the Sabbath day and they criticize Him for that. And He says, you need to go and learn what this means. And He quotes Micah, I believe it is, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." I said last week that I think the actions of sacrifice were meant to teach a lesson to the worshiper, that it would have had an impact on them, right? A very visceral, a very full formed picture of the effect of their sin. And I don't think God was just doing that to gross people out or the other thing is, some people I've heard people talk about this. Well, the book of Leviticus, you can just go sin and then you go kill an animal, and I don't think that was God's thought. I think God was more trying to teach His people, your sin has consequence, and the consequence of sin is death, right? The wages of sin is death, is the way that we would say it. And so He was really looking for a change in people. And that's why by the time you get to the prophets, they're saying things like, God is tired of your feasts, right? He's tired of your offerings because it's not having the effect on you that it should. You're just, finding ways to continue to do this rather than to change your heart. And I think that's the same thing that He's saying to the Pharisees here. I desire mercy. In other words, you should be thinking about other people rather than, I want you to, I want to see you take on God saying, I want you to take on my character and act mercifully in the same way that I've acted mercifully toward you, rather than thinking about myself and keeping the perfect letter of the law. Mark 12 is interesting because it's not really Jesus. Well, it's not Jesus at all. It's a guy who came to Jesus. And basically the guy's saying, hey, what's the most important commandments? You might remember that story. Look at Mark 12:32-34. Just read that. That's kind of the end of this whole narrative.
Yeah. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions.
So this is what we call the great day of questions, the very end of it. But here's this man, they talk about, here's the greatest commandments, just like Jesus said elsewhere. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the answer comes back, yeah, that's more important. You see what I'm saying? The change in my attitude and my feelings toward those around me are more important than the burnt offerings, all the burnt offerings in the world. So again, it's not the cart before the horse, right? The sacrificial system was also designed by God to change us. But by the time you get to Jeremiah, Jeremiah says we've got hearts of stone, and the only thing that's going to change us is heart surgery, right? They're going to have to cut out our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh. And so that's the sacrifice, then the offering that we see throughout this. Paul says it. Of course, the Hebrew writer says it a lot, and I'll say more about that in just a minute. Talks about the fact that Jesus then becomes our ultimate sacrifice. One of the places I thought it'd be interesting to look at because of this, and then the next thing I want to talk about is in Romans chapter 3, 21-26. Very famous passage. You want to read that for us?
Yeah. Romans 3.
Chapter 3,
yeah. We'll talk about this and I'll ask my question. 21-26. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by his grace through redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement.
Okay, see that phrase?
Mm-hmm.
God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement. So thinking about what we've been talking about today, we get
trespass offering,
exactly.
sin offering,
exactly. He is the one who provides for us ultimate forgiveness of sins. He is the sacrifice of atonement. But you notice that Paul uses this language, this Old Testament language, right? This Leviticus language, for lack of a better term. Go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead and finish.
No, I was just thinking back, when we talk about like he doesn't, it's better than all of the sacrifices.
Sure.
Like it wasn't just about the sacrifices themselves. It was about the heart of the worshiper in the sacrifice as well. Like the sacrifice did have purpose and meaning, but would you say like it was as equally important for like the way in which the worshiper came to the sacrifice as well?
I think that's exactly right. And I've often said it's the same with us today, right? We have different ways of worshiping. There's several questions that come up from time to time. You and I come from a tradition where every Sunday we took the Lord's Supper, and regularly that would be criticized by saying, well, that's too often. It becomes empty,
too rote,
empty of meaning. I don't think it has to do with the frequency. I think it has to do with the way we approach it. Okay. If we approach the Lord's Supper, and again, by the way, we'll get to this in a minute. By the way, the Lord's Supper is representing to us and reminding us of Christ's sacrifice, right? If that becomes to us routine, then and we don't pay attention to it, then I think, that's a worshiper problem, right? I think it's the same with prayer. Some traditions will participate in saying the Lord's Prayer together, which we'll maybe talk about that another day. I don't really want to handle that right now, but there are people who say, "Oh, it's just so empty. It's just repetition of empty words, that kind of thing." Well, I think it depends on if you're focused on what you're saying. I think we can, if our prayer is, rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub or whatever, are we offering these as real, authentic acts of worship toward God, or have they become vacuous? Have they become
Right.
empty? And so I think that's really, I think, our worship, our songs.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We need to be engaged in thinking about what we are singing to the creator of the universe, right?
Right.
And so I think that's the whole point, whether it's an Old Testament sacrifice or whether it's prayer or the Lord's Supper or worship,
Yeah.
singing, what I mean, singing in worship, all of those, I think, any of those they're good. There's nothing wrong with the thing itself, right? It's God given.
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say?
Well, it's just, on the scarcity side of like communion, the novelty, if you don't do it very often, the novelty is not what gives it meaning.
Right.
It's just like, well, we don't have it very often, so it makes it more meaningful. Well, no,
not necessarily.
Well,
right.
yeah,
if you don't understand what you're doing,
as I was working on our website, I kept hearing the Atonement episode, or not the Atonement, but the Advent episodes, and I heard the story of myself talking about like, Christmas Eve. I was in the service and I didn't feel anything. Well, that comes once a year. Like, it wasn't about that the evening was removed from meaning.
Right.
It was that I was not prepared myself to come to that time. Like, and that, so it's not the scarcity. It's not the repetition. It's how we prepare ourselves and our hearts in that.
All you have to do is turn it around. And if you say it about anything else, well, we do this too frequently, right? So it rips it out of me. If you talk about anything else, well, so I'm only going to pray once a quarter, because if I pray to God too often, I'm only going to read my Bible once a quarter, because if I do it too often, it's just going to become meaningless. Or, I'm only going to, fill in the blank, right? I've often used the example. I'm only going to tell my wife I love her once a quarter, because if I do that more often, it's just going to become
she's not going to cherish it when I actually do say it.
So, you get what I'm saying. It's ridiculous to think that it is the frequency with which we do something that either makes it meaningful or not. That just don't get me started. I guess it's too late.
Well, but I think this kind of goes back to our very first episode of this season about like the secular age, the age that we live in. It's about in this imminent frame where we're in our own minds. It's about my experience of it at this time is what gives it meaning. Like and we have to find a way to go like, this has transcendent meaning. Like, I am communing with the crucified Lord and my brothers and sisters in the big way to my left and right and across the world. So like, we have to find a way, because I think that's what, when we find ourselves in this place of this flatness and these things of like the repetition is well, it's because it's all about us. We've lost this sense of, we're you talk about the songs we're singing. Are we singing to a creator God, or am I singing words that someone has just put on a screen in front of me?
I'm not going to be able to remember them, and it's going to drive at least one of our listeners crazy that I can't remember who these quotes are attributed to. But one of the early church fathers called the Lord's Supper our food. Right. It is what sustains us. Another called it holy medicine. Right. It is spiritual medicine for us. And again, we've gone so far from wanting to see the elements themselves as having some kind of magic, mystical power, that I think we've sometimes made it devoid of any meaning. So we're actually going to talk about this a little bit more, but we'll go back and let's read Romans 3. Go ahead and start again, because I interrupted you in the middle, because I want you to notice two different things that are here. One of them is that idea of sacrifice of atonement, but the other one's a little bit later. So go ahead and just read that passage over.
Okay, this is Romans 3:21 through 26. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus.
So there's a lot. I mean, this is a rich passage, and it's one that's, there's lots of
ink spilled on this one.
I was going to say lots of debate about this passage as well. I don't want to really get into too much about justification and so forth, but
we have a whole episode about that.
We do. Go back and listen to that. And I've mentioned before that all is probably the key word here. I think we focus too much sometimes upon the other. It's basically saying, well, Jew and Gentile, all are, just all are sinners, mm-hmm. and all are justified freely. But what I want you to notice is it's the sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood. And here's what I want you to notice. Another thing as we look through this Leviticus 1 through chapters 1 through 7, what you notice is that the blood is handled by the priests. And one of the things I talked about in last episode in the burnt offering is we don't often understand how much of the action of sacrifice that the worshiper himself was responsible for. But it's also very interesting to me that the priests are the ones that are given the responsibility for handling the blood. There's this passage that we're going to see that talks about that forgiveness of sins is found in the shedding of blood. It's that, and I think it's that idea that blood is a sign of a representative of life, right? So the life's blood of this animal is drained away and is offered. It's supposed to be put down splashed on the altar. Even the birds. This pigeon is supposed to be done by the priest because it's such a small amount of blood
that rip it open.
It's important that blood has to get onto the altar because that idea of blood, you think about. One thing it makes me think about is Cain and Abel, right? This idea of shedding of blood, this idea of what we've done in turning ourselves apart from the giver of life. It's brought death and blood. Shedding of blood is a symbol of that. And my point is this: the priests are the ones who are responsible for handling that. And this idea of blood becomes a very important part of our Christian tradition as well. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, when you look at the book of Leviticus and you see how carefully and how very specifically God delineates what's supposed to happen with the blood, I think it points to the sacrifice of Jesus as well. I know that some people don't like that image. I mean, I get it. I mean, there are people who really don't like to talk about this, but it's a biblical New Testament concept we can't get away from. I mean, you get Jesus saying things like, when he institutes the Lord's Supper, for example, this is my blood. This is the new covenant, my blood, which is shed for you. Right. Mm-hmm. And whenever you drink it, you are to remember me. We find, there's this passage I've just mentioned here. You find this idea of the blood of the covenant. Of course, throughout the book of Hebrews, I think, trying to remember, a little bit over 20%, about a fifth of all the references to blood in the New Testament are in the book of Hebrews. The Hebrew writer, it's a very big deal that Jesus' blood was shed on our behalf. A couple of others I want to look at. Look at Romans chapter 5, just a couple chapters over, verses 6 through 11. You're going to find Jesus' blood mentioned there as well.
Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 11?
Yes.
You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we now have received reconciliation.
So this idea of we're justified through his blood, right? Mm-hmm. His death, this idea that the shedding of his blood. You mentioned the Lord's Supper. We talked a little bit about the Lord's Supper earlier. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 16, I think is a very interesting when we're thinking about, especially what you brought up about the secular age and kind of our demystifying of the universe. But look at 1 Corinthians 10:16.
Is not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks a participation in the blood of Christ? And is not the bread that we break a participation in the body of Christ?
So in some ways in this act, we are participating right in him. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people want to point, and we've talked about John 6 before and how I don't see that exactly as talking about the Lord's Supper, but in John 6, Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. And so you can kind of see where people took this, the importance of the blood of Jesus and what that means for us. One more passage. This is my favorite one on the blood of Jesus. This is in 1 Peter. I really love the book of 1 Peter. But 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 2, he identifies Christians as those who have been sprinkled with the blood of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. And probably an image that goes all the way back actually to the book of Exodus, where you have the covenant ceremony where the bulls are sacrificed and then their blood is, half of it's put on the altar and then half of it is spread on the people. Right. In order to say that they're covered right under this blood. And there's the same thing there. And then verses 18 through 19 then.
You want to read that for us real quick?
Sure.
For this is 1 Peter 1, 18 through 19. For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect.
We're then redeemed by the blood of Christ. And it's interesting. Peter says it's more valuable to us than silver or gold, right? It's not something empty, but it is something that is full. And so this language, that, and of course we see it even in our hymns, right? I was thinking there's power in the blood, some of those old
wonder working power in the blood.
But even things like songs like Cornerstone and others, make reference to the importance of the blood of Jesus in our faith. Obviously, again, I understand standing for his death, but this idea that his blood was shed on our behalf, and that's what I think. Again, Leviticus, without this system and without the way we see the blood being treated and handled here, the importance of it, the language of the New Testament reflects, I think, what we see in the book of Leviticus, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It's good to make those connections, that help us see that Leviticus is not just a barren black hole of things, but like that there's important things and there are important connections for us to understand what's happening in the New Testament, what's happening with Jesus. Yeah. I was teaching 3rd and 4th graders just a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about something from the Old Testament and the New Testament. Oh, we were talking about the memory verse was Lamb of God. And I said, well, what does it mean?
Right.
What does Lamb of God mean? Right. Why is this important? And so we had to go back and talk about the Exodus story. And I'm like, This is why all of your Bible is important. We can't just, it's one of those things that we can say the words Lamb of God, but until we understand what really is happening, that verse doesn't mean anything to us. And so talking about how the Bible it's a great book that connects us beginning to end to see, so we understand who Jesus was. And just as you said, if Jesus had just shown up and said, hey, I'm taking care of your sins and all that stuff without the Old Testament, they would have been like, cool, man. They would, like, go for it. They wouldn't have known what was going on. So this is great, Brian. I'm excited.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So what do we do after this with Leviticus? Where do we go from there?
We keep going through the book of Leviticus.
more Leviticus.
More of the same. We're done with the sacrificial system. We'll talk some more about some of these other laws that sometimes seem a little arcane to us. Mm-hmm. But what do they, again, the point is, what do they teach us about what God values, what he considers to be important, and what he wants us to be, how he wants us to transform. So.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, thanks so much.
Yeah.
And thank you all to our listeners. If you'd like, you can go to our website, thebiblebistro.com. This episode will be up there.
Brand new looking website. It's the same address, but we
got these little buttons that say watch now,
completely
listen.
Revamped. There's a whole section of books there that you'll find.
So Brian has sent me a couple things because I've been trying to catch up on some Leviticus stuff that we'll have some. If you click on one of the episodes from Leviticus, you can go to the links section on each one of those pages and you can see a couple books we might recommend. So you can check those out there. If you're interested in Leviticus, if you're if you like this kind of blood talk and all that stuff, you can go get your book. I'm just whatever. So you can go there in Leviticus, but we also have some other resources on there for you as well. So Brian, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And thanks again to all our listeners, and we will chat with you all next Tuesday.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.